Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. And just by way of introduction, I'd like to remind ourselves that we began with looking at fiscal framework itself, so we can, and that led into the linkages towards the end between, everything we do in debt management, linking to the macro, linking to revenue, linking to, because those are, the issues that, when not well managed, often result in borrowing, excessive debt, and the rest. We have a rich panel because we continued with looking at, what it means to manage and to set up, from both of our immediate two gentlemen. So, so in the context of those who would want to continue further on the, if you have, or if you do not have, or you want to deepen, the market, or you want to grow the market as has been put, I think we have the panel, to answer that. And then obviously, we are talking about within a regulatory regime, even the government bond market is within a regulatory structure, dealing with Securities and Exchange Commissions. And then we should also remind ourselves that, as I mentioned, some countries have had stock exchanges, regulatory regimes that were dealing with the private sector, corporate bonds. We have a private sector person here. As I mentioned, if you take, Ghana, it's about the Securities and Exchange Commission and the stock exchange are 30 years old, I think 2 years ago. So it's about 32, which takes you to the ERP SAP era. But it took only up to 2015 for government to take its bonds from the central bank, and put it on the stock exchange. And it became instantly a hit. Let's not also forget the downside, because as we have in a country like Ghana, there are pitfalls, and it can end up in destroying, the government bond market, which became the fixed income market. So at this juncture, we would open the floor for our, distinguished, panelists for final round of questions. If you didn't have the opportunity, if you forgot or you just remembered something, this opportunity. We also would entertain some comments, so it shouldn't be just questions. If you have comments or reflection, please do. So the floor is open, not in any particular order, so you can ask any questions. Yes, Morocco.
Sorry, before we start, Jean-Yves, can you turn on your camera? You're part of this panel, so that they can see you and ask you questions, please. Jean-Yves, turn on your camera. Are you there? Jean-Yves? Okay, so let's continue.
Well, okay, that would have added, a context of a multilateral, exchange.
Alors, bonsoir à nos panélistes. Durant la session d'aujourd'hui, nous avons écouté beaucoup de présentations qui étaient vraiment pour moi des enseignements. En tout cas, je vous en remercie pour la qualité des communications. Je voudrais revenir sur une question que j'avais posée, mais dont je n'ai pas eu assez d'éléments de réponse. Donc, je voudrais revenir sur ça. C'est le cas, par exemple, de mon pays, qui a un marché primaire qui n'a pas fini d'expérimenter tous les compartiments. On a un programme avec une institution sous-régionale aujourd'hui qui, en tout cas, des fois, renforce nos capacités dans le cadre du développement du marché intérieur. Maintenant, on a élaboré une feuille de route avec cette institution pour la création des marchés secondaires. Mais des fois, dans nos échanges entre nous, nous estimons, en tout cas, que c'est un peu prématuré à date d'aller vers la création des marchés secondaires à partir du moment où, c'est-à-dire les seules entités pour le moment qui participent à nos émissions, les seuls acteurs, constituent essentiellement les banques. On n'a pas encore engagé des réformes de nature à intégrer les assurances, les caisses de sécurité, les autres sociétés ou, c'est-à-dire les personnes physiques. Ce sont des perspectives qu'on avait définies, qu'on devrait normalement expérimenter avant de passer vers la création des marchés secondaires. En tout cas, j'avais besoin de votre expertise pour mieux nous coacher dans ce sens, parce que tous les pays, en tout cas, qui ont démontré ici qu'ils ont aujourd'hui un marché dynamique, je sais qu'ils n'ont pas commencé par ça. Ils ont commencé d'abord par un marché primaire. Ils ont expérimenté, ils ont utilisé beaucoup d'aspects avant de passer à un marché secondaire. Aujourd'hui, qui ont atteint un niveau, en tout cas, de développement qui constitue même des exemples pour d'autres pays. Je voudrais des conseils en tant que panéliste de haut niveau pour que je puisse prendre très bonne note et répercuter à mon retour à nos autorités. Je vous en remercie.
Okay, another hand here.
Je peux y aller? Oui, merci beaucoup. Je réitère mes remerciements pour toutes les interventions.
I would like you to mention your country and then
I'm sorry.
your name. Yeah, so.
Yes, UB de Madagascar. Oui, alors je disais, je voudrais réitérer mes remerciements pour les présentations d'aujourd'hui. J'ai plusieurs questions, si vous le permettez, concernant l'agencement entre la politique monétaire de la Banque centrale et la politique budgétaire du ministère de l'économie et des finances. En effet, il se trouve que dans certains cas, quand la Banque centrale exerce sa politique monétaire, le Trésor est en difficulté pour recevoir les souscriptions des souscripteurs parce que suite à la politique effectuée par la Banque centrale, les banques, surtout, n'ont plus d'assez de liquidité pour souscrire aux bons du Trésor. La deuxième question concerne sur la liquidité bancaire. Comment on fait pour mobiliser la liquidité bancaire quand il y a un excédent de liquidité? Parce que ce qu'on a à Madagascar maintenant, c'est qu'on fait face à une difficulté de mobiliser cette liquidité alors que ça existe et on ne comprend pas très bien le comportement je parle toujours des banques là, hein, le comportement des banques sur la non-souscription pour les bons du Trésor. Concernant les dépositaires centrales des titres, il est pour le cas de Madagascar, on a deux sortes de bons du Trésor. L'un est géré par la Banque centrale et l'autre est géré par le Trésor public. Et on a recommandé à ce que Madagascar implémente un dépositaire central unique. Alors la question se pose, à votre avis, ça doit être, ce dépositaire unique doit être la Banque centrale, ou bien ça doit être le Trésor, ou bien une autre entité indépendante. Et la dernière question, c'est sur le fonctionnement du marché primaire et secondaire. Pour le cas de Madagascar, tout le monde peut participer au niveau du marché primaire. Et il a été suggéré de limiter seulement à certaines institutions ce marché primaire pour que les autres participants puissent interagir dans le marché secondaire. Est-ce que c'est une bonne solution ou comment on va faire pour développer le marché secondaire? Parce que pour l'instant, Madagascar, il n'y a pas de marché secondaire qui est développé. Merci.
Thank you. Any other before we turn back to them?
Maybe we can, may I suggest that we, because there are about 5 questions in one. So let's be flexible about this. So the first question has to do with, when is it time for a country to launch into yes, and whether the very essence of this is for fragile countries to develop and minimize. So yes. Yeah, you can, yes.
From this perspective. So I think in developing a secondary market, you're quite right, there's a process. So what we often find, and especially when you market, when you in the initial process of developing markets, so what you find that government issue a lot of bonds over the spectrum of the yield curve. So you have many bonds, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, 5 year, 10 years, and none of them are actually very liquid. So it's always a question is that how do you then ensure that your bonds become liquid? Because it doesn't help you have 50 bonds and none of them are liquid. So what you find in many countries is that they have so many bonds issued because every time they basically issue a new bond. So my experience is that it's important to create benchmarks bonds, sort of on the yield curve, say a 3-year bond or a 5-year bond or a 10-year bond, and build liquidity in that. You can even then go to 15-year bond or 20-year bonds. Those are the sort of entry points on the yield curve that there's normally demand for. On those 3 years, those 5 years, those 10-year bonds, 15-year bonds. So the first thing that a debt offer should do is try to consolidate all these smaller bonds into that particular benchmark bond, or to create benchmark bonds. And by creating benchmark bonds, you consolidate your smaller bonds. You undertake a program of consolidation into so that you can create that sort of benchmark bonds over time. And that benchmark bonds are the spots on the yield curve that's normally that the investor wants and there's normally demand for. Secondly, I mean, I can just mention you the South African situation in terms of how we created benchmark, and it's a similar situation that I pick up in Cambodia. Cambodia is also currently developing their market, and the thing is that instead of implementing or introducing primary dealers from the start, it's not going to work. I mean, because there's not yet a turnover in that bond. The primary dealer is going to struggle. It's premature. So I mean, there's different processes, but the process that we initially was put in place was for the central bank to start creating, because they're running our platform for primary issuances, and for them to create that sort of secondary, start to make prices in those benchmark bonds. But the cost, the negative of is the cost of when they start making losses on that will come for government. But that is the school fee that you need to pay to create those bonds, benchmark bonds. Until you reach a stage where these particular bonds become liquid, and then you introduce a primary dealer system that can sort of create, then you transfer your market risk back to the market, and your market is now mature enough to start trading in that particular bond. It's just, I mean, it can work in different ways in other countries, but there is, you're quite right in saying that there should be a process in terms of how you could then create those liquid benchmark bonds on the curve and sort of start trading in those bonds.
Shall we welcome our multilateral exchange, to the forum when we started? So if you have any questions directed at, the Mr. Ivis, I think you can also, he's with us now. He joined us, online. Mr. Doc, I'd like you to, if you have anything to complement, to add, is there a right time for a fragile country, to, initiate a market, or can they also do it parallel with the development of other, markets?
Whether for a fragile country or for a stable country, just as John has said, there's always a right time, there's a sequence, there are preconditions. But what I wanted to add to what John has said, in terms of, because he has emphasized one of the preconditions is that the bonds, the instrument, the security should be liquid in the market for secondary market to work. So one of the ways, using Nigeria example, to make these credits benchmark bonds which are liquid, is to do reissuance. What does that mean? It means that instead of issuing a new bond, assuming you need a 3-year bond in your portfolio, but you have already issued a 6-year bond, for example, which has run for 3 years, so it has 3 years to maturity, okay? Instead of issuing a new 3-year bond, you can reissue that old bond, maturing in 3 years, but which is a 6-year bond. So you issue a new tranche of it, so that that particular bond is now bigger in size. So that's why when you go to the offer circular, and you have a number of bonds to be issued, some of them we say new issue, some of them we say reissuance, which means you are reissuing a bond that exists already. It has an identity already. And maybe 6 years ago, you issued 25 billion of it. Now, you may issue another 25 billion of the same bond, bearing the same 6 years tenor, but with 3 years to maturity. So it cumulates with the existing 6-year bond. So when you look at the 6-year bond, the volume has been doubled. So that's one of the ways of increasing the benchmark. The second point to make is that even before you create the secondary market, the securities will still be traded, because particularly banks will be buying and selling among themselves. Is that what they call over the counter?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. They will be buying and selling over the counter. Okay? And this over the counter market will still exist when you now create the formal secondary market. It will still exist. And in the case of Nigeria, I'm sure we will be able to expatiate. In the case of Nigeria, even that OTC market has been formalized, that it has a life of its own, that is as strong as the life of the other secondary market.
So to our, I'd like our two private, to a complementary question.
Yeah, just the point on secondary market trading. I think Johan and Dr. Abraham have covered it. But I think one initiative that we need to also consider, I know markets are at different stages, is securities lending. Because most times you have banks and pension funds that just have these bonds buy-to-hold strategy. But one way for you to ensure turnover, if you introduce securities lending into the market, where they can lend the security and be earning some money, but at least that bond is trading. So that's another initiative we're seeing in some African markets and some other developing markets in Latin America, where they're trying to introduce securities lending.
If I may want Mr. Ives to come in here, is there an opportunity for a fragile state, to, within your membership or beyond, since you are going beyond, to, float bonds, with institutions like yours?
Now what they're directed to me?
Yes, it's directed to you, please.
Yeah, and you said, I didn't hear you very well. You said for the...
The question is, a fragile state may not be institutionally, ready, to launch, to set up either a debt department or launch a market of its own. So I'm asking, within your multi-country context, is it possible for fragile states, to use your platform, as a means of, borrowing?
Yes, as I said this morning, I don't know if you were there. I mean, in our institution, our stakeholder use the markets. We have a debt market, the bond market, and also we have the equity. And we are also looking to create new markets, such as the derivative market, to have a large, variety of products and services at our exchange. So we do think that it's and the figure shows that the bond market has been very, very dynamic over time. Around we went from 29 listed bond in the early in 1999 to like recently, where we have more than 134 bonds. So I think it's developing. I will not say we enter the mature phase. We are still developing it, and this is why we are introducing new kind of debt instruments. And I talk about the fact that we were able to welcome the first social bond, which is is another kind of debt instrument that has a particular attention on the social impact of the project. And we are also looking to favor or more encourage more green bonds. All those instruments, all those debt instruments will be for our government and corporates in our region.
Okay, thank you very much. There's, I think, one outstanding question, which is the role of the depository. Could any of you address it? There was a question on that.
The role of the
depository with respect to
central bank.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know that the stock exchanges, the depository can be a separate entity. Link with, ideally you want a trade to match on the platform of a stock exchange, and then drop down to a central or settlement agent, which normally hosts a depository for safekeeping of the bonds. So that is normally the structure that you want to follow in the developed market. But I'm not sure, perhaps our friend from the stock exchange can come in here, how can it practical work? Because I know that many of the central banks are sort of, because the lack of, the bonds are not listed, they're not trading, so some of the some of the central banks are developed depository facilities within the central bank. So perhaps so those are the two options that we normally come across, depositories within the central bank. That is if your bonds are not trading actively in a market, or you can have a structure where your bond is listed, you trade through a stock exchange, it's settled in a settlement agent unit, and there's a depository linked to that, electronic depository linked to that, which is ideally if the market is liquid and the bonds are moving from one entity to the other entity. But perhaps, I think, perhaps from a stock exchange perspective, perhaps we can hear just what other sort of, because it's not just the depository that we're thinking here, it's the settlement agent here as well. So I think those two are normally linked, and it's normally linked to a stock exchange. I'm not sure how it works at your stock exchange. Perhaps you can assist us there.
Yes, is anyone can answer? Give us a depository perspective on their role, and the question I wanted to know, the role of the depository versus the central bank being played here.
Oui. Bonjour, je tiens à remercier vraiment les conférenciers parce qu'on a beaucoup appris avec eux, on apprend des expériences des uns et des autres et c'est toujours enrichissant. Alors voilà, pour le dépositaire central, le cas du Maroc, on a une entité séparée de la Banque centrale qui s'occupe, depuis 1997 qu'elle est opérationnelle, qui s'occupe du règlement livraison des obligations de tout type de valeurs. Donc voilà. Alors pour les valeurs du Trésor, que ce soit les bons du Trésor ou les obligations, ils ne sont pas cotés à la bourse. Ils sont négociés de gré à gré. En plus, on a une plateforme électronique de négociation électronique qui impose aux IVT de coter à l'achat et à la vente les valeurs du Trésor. Et donc, ils peuvent aussi passer des transactions à travers e-bond. Ils peuvent, mais c'est minime par rapport aux transactions qui passent de gré à gré. Et après, le dénouement, c'est à travers le dépositaire central. Merci.
I agree with the points shared. I think also bringing practical experience for depositories we see, right? Typically, we've seen depositories aligned with exchanges in Nigerian market. We even have competition amongst the depositories in the Nigerian market, interestingly. In most countries, you have one depository, but in Nigeria, there are two competing depositories. And then in terms of the central clearing counterparty, right, what we're seeing too is that it's an independent party outside of the central bank. But in terms of the shareholders of that, you see banks and other strong financial institutions. So almost all the banks are shareholders in the central clearing counterparty to make it stronger and efficient, and there's no conflict of interest.
Yeah, thank you very much. And if I may just add, Ghana created a depository quite late alongside the setting up of the flotation of the government bonds. And one of its benefits has been that in a rather distressing way, the haircuts, when Ghana went into default, it was very easy to identify the type of bonds that were affected, because It was more orderly. It wasn't like the past where you would have had to go into people's drawers and things to fish out what is it, which bond qualifies, you know. They were registered. And in fact, if you look at, you know, the agreement that's going on, you could see the numbers quoted. The depository was set up between the Ministry of Finance, the banks, and the central bank, you know, particularly the primary bank. So I think it has a very useful role to play. Its mandate is slightly expanding to register other instruments, you know, like you hardly get a document of your land, you know. So besides the stamp duty and others which was being used, now it is expanding into that. And it's becoming easy to, therefore, for the corporate side, if you want to use your house as a collateral, you want to use something as a collateral, it is registered. It's verifiable. So I think that's one of the roles, important roles of a depository. There's one, I was just reminded, one on the fundamental role of the central bank as a monetary institution and the Ministry of Finance, you know, us as a fiscal institution, right? How soon is it for Fragile States, you know, to take a more fiscal approach, you know, and establish particularly a debt management unit that would, you know, take what the central bank used to play. And now we can see technical assistance going down to debt. It used to be revenue expenditure most of the time. You know, ERP SAP was mainly around this. But now it's becoming more common to have the African Development Bank. So can we share perspective quickly, those with experience?
Yeah. Okay, let me make a preliminary contribution in that regard and connect it to the question that was asked by one of us, observing that in his country, I think that's Madagascar, even though there's liquidity in the system, as he said, but the banks are not being able to participate in the market because of central bank policies. So, first of all, it will be necessary to find out what are those specific policies so that you know how to address the challenge. But talking generally, you will recall that in our earlier discussion in the morning, when we are talking of the rules of the debt manager, as well as the rules of the deposit money bank or lending money bank in developing the market, we continue emphasizing that at each stage, the debt manager or the debt management office had that responsibility of taking steps to link up with the monetary authority, which is the central bank, as well as the fiscal authority, as well as the regulators, at each point in time to get their buy-in in the various stages of developing the market, so that all these parties will be part and parcel of it, and they see it as a collective effort. So, from what you have said, it's obvious that the debt management office, or whoever is playing that role now, needs to take that step of making sure that they have located all the issues that they need to discuss with the other agencies, particularly the central bank, the Securitization Commission, so that they will be on the same page. The cooperation would be automatic because the three parties or more parties are pursuing the same objective. So from what you have said, it's like they have not reached that consensus of the relevant parties, major relevant parties, which is the debt management office, the fiscal authority, and the monetary authority, working together to develop the market. There must be that consensus. If there's not that consensus, I don't see how it will work, including the Securities and Exchange Commission. They have to have that common objective of developing the market. So the incidence of the central bank being a blocker to the development of the market would not arise.
We are hard pressed for time. Can we take just one more question? If I think there was a hand up. Yes. Okay, so can we be brief on...
Rapidement. Bonjour, merci pour les différentes réponses. Je suis de la RDC, du Bureau de la dette. Le marché des obligations en RDC est encore à un stade embryonnaire. Seules les banques commerciales participent aux différentes adjudications. Ma question est celle de savoir quelle est la structure qui devrait être chargée d'annoncer l'ouverture des adjudications, car dans mon pays, c'est le ministre des Finances qui le fait sur base des conseils de son cabinet de ses conseillers. Merci.
Okay. Thank you very much for the brilliant presentation. My name is Jawara Mendy. I'm coming from the Gambia. I have a quick question here. Basically, we have also started issuing bonds, as alluded to from people that have already commented here. Our challenge here is like, if you start issuing or working on benchmark bonds, where you have some infrastructure challenges like financial market infrastructure, weak secondary market, you know what I mean? The challenge we are having here is in terms of maturity, whether you are not going to face with what we call bunching, because there will be an element of clustering, and you might have the challenge of the market being able to absorb or being able to roll over. So those are some of the concerns we have, to an extent that sometimes we tend to result into issuing some fragmented bonds, even though that is not the ideal thing. Thank you.
Okay, can we answer the... Yeah, we requested for one, it turned out to be two, are there more? Okay. Yes, please, I was going to run up with only two questions, so please come up. Yeah.
Merci de la question. Ma question s'adresse à Jean-Yves, je ne sais pas si il est en ligne. Jean-Yves qui a présenté sur le marché des capitaux.
Oui, je suis toujours là.
Ok, merci. En fait, je voudrais... Bon, moi, je m'appelle Étienne, je suis du Burundi. Nous sommes dans la phase de la mise en place d'un marché des capitaux. Je voudrais que vous puissiez justement faire de façon succincte, donc par un schéma qui montre à quel niveau donc le marché des capitaux pourrait renforcer le cadre de gestion de la dette et de gestion de la trésorerie. Merci.
Ok. Merci beaucoup pour cette question. Effectivement, on a parlé de tous ces mécanismes pour pouvoir recourir à des sources de financement. Hein. Donc, on a parlé des banques, pour des entreprises plus petites, des microfinances. Donc, toutes sortes d'institutions financières qui peuvent permettre de se lever des fonds. La bourse est l'achèvement c'est celle qui permet à la fois de pouvoir solliciter du grand public, on va dire l'épargne publique. Et donc du coup, parce que la bourse a ce régulateur, dans les banques, la banque centrale alloue à la bourse une certaine autonomie pour faire ce travail en particulier, pouvoir utiliser du grand public, pouvoir aller rechercher, mobiliser des ressources du grand public. Donc, on a la bourse qui permet de faire ça à la fois en capital et à la fois en dette. Donc, on peut dire que chacun a un rôle qui est plus particulier. Par exemple, les fonds de private equity pour mobiliser des fonds pour pouvoir financer l'économie, ils vont avoir des fonds qui vont allouer à des entreprises en particulier, les préparer, et ensuite elles les emmèneront in fine à la bourse pour pouvoir avoir des fonds plus conséquents. Donc je pense que pour le Burundi, il faut pouvoir se dire, est-ce que nous voulons pour les sociétés qui se développent dans le pays, favoriser un mécanisme qui va leur permettre la distribution des richesses produites à travers un plus grand nombre d'actionnaires. Est-ce que c'est ce que nous voulons favoriser au Burundi? Je pense que, j'imagine que la réponse sera oui. Donc c'est un peu ça que favorise la bourse. Est-ce que, je pense que je peux dire.
So maybe you can take turns. One, there's a question on cash management, intersection with debt management, and then the other one we want to take Congo so that if you can.
Okay, so I think there was a particular question from I think the Gambia on coming to the market and sometimes not getting the demand that you desire, right? And I think that one points to a number of things. I think I heard Dr. Abraham mention having an issuance calendar. It might be done, but if it's not done, it's good to have an issuance calendar ahead of time so that investors can plan. So typically what some debt management offices do is that they issue it ahead of time quarterly, so that investors can plan their liquidity towards that, and then they're not caught unawares by the amount that the sovereign is trying to raise. I think another thing one can also do too is trying to deepen the investor community apart from banks. So currently it looks like maybe it's just solely banks, but as we mentioned, it's a long journey. It wouldn't happen overnight, but I think you have to try and deepen the non-banking industry. So asset managers, insurance companies, pension funds, where can we work with certain agencies to make savings mandatory? So over time you have that buffer. So I think those are the points I wanted to just speak to about timing your issuance. And also maybe from the supply side, maybe over time you do an analysis to see when there's a lot of investment, and then you can time the amount you're trying to raise to channel when a lot of people have funds to invest for some certain reasons. So you can also, from the supply side, look at that analysis over time and find, are there particular months, are there coupon payments, are there liquidity events that could warrant increased percent, and you then align your issuances to that. So that's
okay, so can you take the two? There was a question on the
cash management.
Cash management, intersection with debt management. In terms of sequence.
Yeah. Okay, I'm not sure I'm going to address this specifically, but in terms of sequence, I mean, ideally, the cash manage should be work closely with the debt manager in terms of when is the when to issue the bonds, or when cash is required, and then the debt manager can then respond, or then can plan their issuance according to the cash needs of the government. So that is ideally. So normally you will, as a debt manager, you will, at the beginning, when the budget is stable, you will sort of in your strategies and in your borrowing plan indicate you know exactly what's the deficit, and you need to sort of then discuss or then come to a sort of agreement, understanding what sort of options are there for you in terms of funding, what instruments in terms of you can use in terms of funding that deficit. And then it's for you then to coordinate that activity with your cash manager in terms of when they need the money, and then you can sort of plan your issuance according to the need. It's also another important element that I perhaps left out in my previous discussion, is that a very important element in terms of debt and cash coordination is that the cash manager, so during a financial year, there are certain peaks that government would have more cash than other times, so that your plan your interest payment dates and your redemption dates according to the cash peaks of government. So there's no sense if your financial year end at, say, end of March and the 1st of April is a redemption. I mean, you will not have enough cash to sort of, if it's but say, for example, you will have more cash in August or in December, then you can sort of structure your interest payment dates and your redemption dates according to the cash buffers of government. So yeah, I'm not sure if that is specifically there, but it's very. All I can say is it's very important that cash and debt coordinate their activities. And once that happens, you will know that your issuances are structured and well planned, and the market will also buy into that. It's very important that the market then understand when you are coming to the market and what amount you will need eventually.
We can see that almost all the issues raised revolve around having a best practice debt management office, because it will be able to address these issues, most of which are issues of relating appropriately with other players in the market, including the regulators. So having a functioning debt management office is critical to dealing with these issues.
Okay, so in wrapping up, let me just address briefly the issue of the monetary policy and the fiscal policy. Even when you have strong institutions as the presentations, a strong debt and cash management within the fiscal context, as the presentations have shown, the central bank is still relevant. And one way in which the central bank may be relevant is in some laws. At the moment, zero financing is a thing, and there's a frowning upon of central bank advancing, money to the, for example, in a situation where the auction falls short, within limits. For example, Ghana is in the law, even though we try to do zero financing, that the central bank can do 5%. It used to be 5% of current budget, but the current budget is not quite measurable, so it was done of the previous year's budget because the probable actual, is known. That may be one way in which the central bank, if the law permits, can come in, to assist. Besides the calendar, which I think is a very useful predictor, of. We should also remember that the central bank plays a role because of open market operations, which is a fundamental. And so normally the issuances for government are piggybacked on their OMO, operations, particularly with respect to short-term, bills and notes in many countries. It's when you start extending into 3-year, 5-year, and longer bonds that attraction comes, to take the government instrument, to the stock exchange, and then have a private dealer, system. So to the extent that such monetary policy activity, including reserve ratios and the rest, impact, costs to the government and the rest, I think we can say there should be some collaboration continuously in the interest of managing the macro, economy. So I want to thank you.
Yeah, just one last.
Yeah. Okay.
C'est une courte intervention. C'est juste par rapport à qui doit avoir le lead pour les réformes du marché de la dette intérieure. Parce que notre objectif, c'est pouvoir développer un marché de la dette intérieure. Donc il y a beaucoup d'intervenants qui ont tous quelque chose à apporter. Donc l'expérience que nous, on a vécu au Maroc, c'est le ministère des Finances qui prenait le lead. Et on réunissait les intermédiaires en valeur du Trésor qu'on avait désignés au départ avec la Banque centrale. Il y avait une concertation, il y avait un échange et on s'inspirait aussi des expériences à l'international. Et chaque fois, on s'adapte au contexte. Par exemple, récemment, l'année dernière, quand il y avait un peu l'augmentation de l'inflation, il y avait une demande sur les bons à taux révisables, donc on a répondu favorablement à cette demande. On a mis en place ces bons à taux variables pour pouvoir se financer et répondre aussi à la demande du marché. Et donc, mais il n'y a pas que ça, il y a aussi le ministère des Finances, il joue aussi un rôle important dans la mesure où c'est lui qui fait la réglementation concernant la bourse, concernant les organismes de placement collectif en valeur immobilière, concernant les compagnies d'assurance. Donc voilà, il y a un écosystème à développer où le ministère des Finances, mais ce n'est pas parce que je représente le ministère des Finances que je dis ça, mais c'est une expérience que je tiens à partager avec vous.
Yeah, okay. There was in the presentation the committee system, which was put up to ensure that things are smooth. I think you.
Yeah. I agree fully with you. I mean, we spoke about the role of the debt manager. It's not just the role of the debt manager is not just issuing bonds. The role of the debt manager wears various hats. It needs to be, it's your market, you need to develop it. And make sure that you lead that process. Sometimes you find that the stock exchanges or there's other entities in the market that wants to start leading, developing the market without inputs or a combination. Because, I mean, face it, that many entities, they will develop something in their best interest. My friend here from a central bank perspective, from the RMB, I mean, he wears the RMB cap. In government, you can't just wear one cap. You must wear several caps in terms of, and making sure that when you manage monetary policy, your inputs in monetary policies, your inputs in the market, your inputs with the budget office, your information that you share, your inputs with the investors, all of that. It's a complex task. So and it's not easy. So the debt managers the role of the debt manager is very, very important. Thanks.
Okay, so thank you very much for the opportunity. On behalf of my, panelists, we want to say a big thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much.